How do you define, develop, and execute your legacy when you've built an eight-figure company, sold it for nine figures, and you still want to pay it forward? Welcome this morning to the Design Your Legacy podcast. My name is Angelina Carleton. I'm the hostess, and I'd like to welcome Mr. Jeffrey Feldberg this morning. Mr. Feldberg is the co-founder and CEO of Deep Wealth. His mission is to help you capture the maximum value for your next liquidity event. Through the Deep Wealth experience, you master the same nine-step roadmap that Jeffrey has created for his nine-figure exit. He is an MBA graduate and he launched his first company, Embanet, and he is an industry leader today. So, welcome, Jeffrey.
Hey, Angelina, it's so terrific to be here. Such an honor, and thank you for having me on the show. How are you this morning?
I'm good. I'm good. And I think this is wonderful. And I joked with you before, I'm not interested in your money, but I am interested in your legacy. But I'm bump. So, what would you like to share about your background, if at all, regarding how you got to where you're at? And then I'd like to dive into my first question.
Yeah, for sure. For all the listeners out there that may be wondering, I'm going to disappoint you. Full disclosure, I have a confession. There was no magic pill. There was no magic bullet. Some people look at me and say, Jeffrey, you're a kid right out of school and you started this online company and then bam, it just happened. And I look at them and I say, well, yeah, maybe. I guess I was an overnight success, a 13-year overnight success. And offline, Angelina, you and I were talking, and I got to tell everyone, if I had a dollar for every mistake that I made, I wouldn't have needed the liquidity event in the first place. I have made and continue to make so many mistakes. And as an entrepreneur, it's never a straight line trajectory. It's maybe half a step forward, 10 steps back, a foot forward, 20 steps back. But if I learned anything, because I started my e-learning business right out of my MBA program, typical story, no money, no experience, no team, living out of the parents' attic. And I welcomed a new best friend. I didn't know it, but I had an immediate BFF, otherwise known as failure. But failure taught me a lot. And what I learned from failure was it's only a failure if you never learn from it or if you make the same mistake twice. But if you have a so-called failure and you can learn from that and move forward, as hard as failure is, I've often learned more from my failures than I have from my successes. And for everyone listening out there, I really hope you can take that to heart, not just for business, but for life, for your legacy and everything else that we'll be talking about today.
Yes, yes. And I like what you said about the hard work piece. I think people forget that today.
Yeah, you know what? And I can get on a rant, and you're going to have to stop me here. But I'll keep it short. I wrote an article. Just if you in your favorite search engine type in the word cockroach startups, and for me, what's happened is so Embanet was a traditional cockroach startup. What's a cockroach startup? It's when you bootstrap, and this is how things had always started. But along comes, back in the day, it was called venture capital. Today we call it private equity. And it's, hey, Mr. or Ms. Entrepreneur, you know what? You don't even need a real business. You don't even need clients. You don't need profits. Just get some revenues on a business model that doesn't work and you can retire rich. And that has just, in my mind, not in my mind, but also out there, it has just corrupted a whole generation of entrepreneurs. And listen, it's hard work. It's not easy. But in the intro, you talked a little bit about my background, but I believe that as business owners, and I put everyone, us on the call, and the listeners as business owners, we make the world go round. Think about it.
The
We're
ideas and the sweat equity.
yeah, we're
Yeah.
solving the problems. We're up at nights, worrying about it when everyone else is sleeping, and that to me is really what being an entrepreneur is. We're bootstrapping it. We have resilience greater than resources, and again, I can go on and on, but I will stop there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what you're sharing in that even just to create the nine-step roadmap, that took effort and time and experience. Like, I think these days with the internet, and this is again before I jump into my first question, people want this like three-step or four-step plan. And even just to distill it down to those simple steps takes time.
It listen, it takes time,
And that BFF called failure, that
and
people
yes,
that
and the
there's going to
BFF
be a
called
season where
failure.
you're going to look really bad and you're going to just bite it and yeah, and live with
And,
it.
and Angelina, I have a confession. Can I throw it out there? I have another confession here.
Sure.
When when I did the liquidity event for myself and my business partners, it wasn't 9 steps, believe it or not. Some of those steps, so to pay it forward, and looking back, I said, okay, what were the biggest failures that we had in our liquidity event? And we took those failures, we reverse engineered them, and that's how we get, all this fancy marketing jargon, the 9 step rope. Well, that's how we get to some of the 9 steps from failures. But again, I believe, and this goes into your legacy side of things, as with success and as an entrepreneur, I believe it's our responsibility to pay it forward, because I can tell you, I would not be where I am today. I literally am standing on the shoulders of giants, and why they took me in and why they helped me. Sometimes I look back and I have no idea, but I'm so grateful. And I said, okay, if in any way I can ever pay that back and pay that forward, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and one of the things I noticed is that your earliest mentors, in addition to your father and your uncle, they were books,
Oh yes,
good old-fashioned
listen,
books and bios.
for sure, Henry Ford and Bill Gates and biblical figures, and you just name it, Richard Branson. I mean, I was with the who's who, but it was at home with a book. But
Yeah, yeah.
think about it, to read a book, what, 2 3 hours, and someone has distilled a lifetime of knowledge, and they've when they're open about it, they're sharing both their success and failure. I don't know any other way that you can really do that, and it's available for everyone. And if you're saying, hey Jeffrey, that's nice, but I don't have the budget, well, go to the library. And remember those things called libraries, before the internet, and you can take out a book and read it.
Yes, yes. So out of curiosity, did you grow up in Toronto?
So I grew up in Toronto. I consider myself a Canadian American entrepreneur. I've been typically based out of Toronto, traveled extensively through the US, and the majority of my businesses have been US based.
Very cool. Okay. I just wanted to highlight for a moment that you're self-made in the sense that you had to work for this.
Well, you know what? Not to throw off some listeners here, I am not self-made.
Okay.
And for me, everything that I do, some people call it the universe, some people call it God, some people call it whatever they like to call it. I have just been very fortunate to be blessed in that way. When I've gotten off that path, when my ego has just become bigger than the size of Texas, and I think I can do everything and anything, and I really blow it, that's on my own. And I don't believe anybody ever is self-made. It takes a community of people. For me, it's my spirituality, it's my belief as well, that's part of that.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, we got that straight and squared away. Okay. So congrats. You are now financially independent. And the canvas is blank regarding the world of possibilities of what you could do to design your legacy. So before I ask you what you would like your legacy to be, I'd like to know, how do you define this word personally?
Yeah, you know what? I've been very fortunate in I speak and meet with so many business owners, and so many people that are up and on their way to becoming successful, and people who are successful, and the topic of legacy comes up. And I'm going to give you Jeffrey's rose-colored glasses view, because I think more is made out of legacy than what's there. And I had a very a down-to-earth conversation with a friend recently, and he was telling me within his family they were talking, and it was his great 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 grandfather that apparently was some business magnate and hugely successful. And he looked at me and says, Jeffrey, I don't even know the guy's name. And nothing that he's done has really today impacted me. And he said, I'm sharing this with you because it got me thinking, what are my great 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 grandchildren? Are they even going to know my name? And probably not. Probably not. Let's check the ego at the door. And so, we were talking about that, and it just reinforced what I've always believed, that for me, a legacy isn't something for 5 generations down, because it starts, at least for me, it starts at home. And I have two incredible daughters, and it's all about them. It starts with them, and, God willing, their children and perhaps their children's children. But if it starts with them and it works with them, and when 300 years from now, when I'm no longer here, and I've taken my last breath, and they're still talking stories amongst each other, and they're good memories, positive ones, that to me is a legacy. It's nothing to do with wealth or money or a library named after you, or a hospital wing named after you. And in fact, again, my own personal bias, doing that kind of stuff. I like doing things anonymously. I don't even like my name out there, because do it because you want to do it. Not, again, my bias, not because you want the recognition. So for me, legacy starts at home, it stays at home, and where it goes, it really, it's really out of our control at that point, and up to the family.
Very nice. So, am I accurate that your parents immigrated to Toronto?
So I'm kind of first generation, one and a half generation Canadian. So my father's side, he emigrated with his family, and he was 7 years old when they came. And typical immigrant story. They had whatever they could carry in their pockets, which wasn't a heck of a lot. Started with nothing. Today he'd be called a latchkey kid. Dating myself a little bit with that term. The parents were working. It was just himself and his brother, and it was really tough times. His brother did not go on to university because he went to work to support my father, who went on to become a pharmacist. And my uncle went on to create just an incredible business success in his own right, truly a titan of business, and very proud of him and his entire family of what they were able to do. And on my mother's side, she was first generation. She was born here, but they're all immigrants. And so growing up, I had that immigrant mentality, which I think is a wonderful mentality to
Because
have,
of the work
because
ethic?
it's the work ethic. You have something to prove. You don't take things for granted, and it's just good core values of hard work, being honest. Your word is your bond. You're integral, and you do the right thing.
Yes. So, did your family and extended family ever talk about legacy when you were growing up? Or were they just busy working, trying to put food on the table?
They were too busy working trying to put food on the table. I mean,
Okay.
legacy would be like red wine. That was a fancy thing that other people did,
Okay.
but not
That's honest.
not
Yes.
but not them, and certainly not around the dinner table.
Okay. Okay. Very cool. So, thank you for sharing how you define legacy, what you would like your legacy to be, and also just some of um, the principles that you honor, such as putting perhaps your philanthropy out there, but not necessarily having to have your name attached to it.
Absolutely. And again, philanthropy takes different forms, and I'll share for everyone out there. I think the easy part of philanthropy is to write the check. And for me, in some ways, that's not even philanthropy. Anybody can write a check. But what are you really doing beyond that? Do you care? Are you writing the check just because you're feeling the social pressure that you have to, or it's what you quote unquote should be doing? Or are you fired up enough to actually do something different, make a difference? And so for me, philanthropy takes all different forms. And yes, I get it that money is needed, and it can make a difference, and there's a time and a place for that. But money for me is not at the top of the list when it comes to philanthropy. It's your personal involvement and what you're doing to really be like, I'll use the bumblebee example. A bumblebee is out there pollinating all the flowers. And that's one of the things that gets me out of bed quite openly, Angelina, with Deep Wealth, is I know, yes, I could write a check, but I know that when business owners go through our 90-day Deep Wealth experience, if I can be blunt about it, not only will they be successful, they will be wealthier. And this is where we encourage them to take an allocation of their wealth where they can set up a foundation or put the money towards some kind of cause or charity. And so deep wealth for me is like that bumblebee that's pollinating, because I like to say we can change the social fabric of society one liquidity event at a time. And through deep wealth, and the affluence and influence that we can have is far bigger than any one large check that ever could be written, when you're talking about all these businesses and the business owners and the people that they impact. And it's just something to me that's very personal and exciting.
Yeah. So it's the consistent daily actions.
Consistent daily actions, it's making a difference, helping people. I'm a big believer of help enough people get what they want, help enough people solve a painful problem, and eventually you'll get what you want. And I mean, after all, isn't that what entrepreneurship's all about, of solving painful problems that are relevant and making a difference?
Yes. Yes. So what is meaningful to you today, in addition
What's
to your daughters?
it's really, you know what, it's going to sound very singular. It's really family.
Okay.
My The mother of my daughters, Waleska, although we're no longer married, we live across the street from each other. We're still business partners and best friends. And so really it's that family unit for me that I put everything first. When I was an entrepreneur, with Embanet in the early days, I would be traveling 6 months of the year. And so my daughter, Victoria, for the first 5 years of her life, I really missed a lot of her up, and I'd be on the road. I mean, I'd do crazy things. I would leave the East Coast. I'd fly to LA to have a lunch with a client, and then I'd fly back so I could be back. You know, Victoria, my eldest, was sleeping in the morning when I left. She was sleeping at night when I got back. But I was doing that. But along the way, I said, you know what, this is crazy, but I'm going to do this crazy life so I can have a regular, uncrazy life. You know, if I'm fortunate enough to be successful. But I made a promise to myself, if I was ever in a fortunate position where I could then be there for Victoria, and later on we had Emma, our second daughter. If I could be there for my girls for the most mundane school event, just because that became my focus, and I've been very fortunate to and grateful that that's what I'm now able to do.
That's wonderful. So, what would you like to do more of in addition to being there for them?
In addition to to the family, for me, Angelina, it's really paying it forward, helping
Okay.
people. Deep wealth is the way that I do that.
So, I almost want to say your cup is full and now it can runneth over.
My cup is full, and now it can runneth over. And
Okay.
being surrounded by such smart and capable business owners and helping them, they've already put the pieces together. They have the answers, they don't have the questions, and I've just been down this path. So I've been fortunate that I can then help them, sculpt them, and send them in the right direction to really make a difference. And for me, that's also part of legacy, where people can look back and say, you know what, wow, that Jeffrey, he really did some spectacular things for us. We wouldn't be where we are today if not for that. And I'm not looking
If
for
you
the
didn't care.
accolades, and if you didn't
Yeah.
care. It's
Yeah.
not about the accolades, it's about making a difference, knowing that you're a change maker.
Yeah. So, what would you say now that you have freedom of choice? What are you more conscious of?
I'm more conscious of, and it's going to have a negative connotation, but it really isn't. And, for some unbeknownst reason to me, social programming has put a negative connotation around taking care of oneself. Some people call it selfish.
Okay.
I think selfish is good, because if you can take care of yourself, so if you show up at your best, then you can take care of everyone else around you. But if you're sacrificing yourself for other people because it's the right thing to do, or you feel the social pressure, or you don't want to let people down, but you don't really want to be there, everybody loses. They know that you know that you don't want to be there. You're tired, you're burnt out, you're not doing it at your best. So for me, it's part of, okay, Jeffrey marched to his own drummer, but in the best positive way that anyone could, because by taking care of himself, he was able to take care of everyone around him.
Yeah. I think what you're pointing to is when you won't compromise your values, it can startle other people because they may have normalized compromising here and there as normal.
Absolutely. And, Angelino, we saw a lot of this with the pandemic. I mean, who would have thought, not even 10 years ago, not even 20 years ago, who would have thought 3 years ago that it would become socially acceptable to not be in person at a wedding or at a funeral, and that you're going to be watching remotely through video streaming? It sounds nuts, it sounds rude, it sounds insane, but that's exactly what happened because of the pandemic, and now all the social norms have changed. And so, what we value today, look, if you go back 100 years and what the social norms were at that time, we look and oftentimes we're like, what were they crazy? What were they thinking about? But you know what? We're no different. It's just different crazy things that we view as normal, that 100 years from now they're going to look back and say, what were they thinking?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, very honest. And I think it's important to have this reflection and to be in what I call that space of decision compared to just being in reactionary mode. So, speaking about the place that you're at today, which is many affluent people can wake up and they have, the calendar is wide open. They can choose to stay in bed all day and do nothing, or they can build upon past successes if that's what they want. And I know you've got an advisory team around you that you've designed, which is excellent. But how do you challenge yourself every day now that you might not have a boss or shareholders, saying, Jeff, you got to make the deadlines for the M&A, the sales coming up?
And this is where it goes back to being selfish again. And listen, I've been on all sides of the coin here, and I'll share with everyone quite humbly. It was a humbling experience for me, and I'm not proud with what I'm going to share. After my liquidity event, I just had an ego that would not fit in a room. I had the biggest ego. I thought I could just do anything and it would just all work out. And openly, some of the biggest mistakes that I've made have come after my liquidity event.
I think you
And
shared that when we spoke last time. Yeah.
last time we spoke, we spoke about that. But what came out of that was, and look, there's no right or wrong. It's whatever really works for each individual. To me, my boss is myself, and if I'm not happy with myself, that's a problem for me. If I'm not looking back and saying, I gave it my all and I left nothing on the table, if I can't say that, then that for me is a failure. Now, maybe, one day that, leaving it all on the table and I've just nothing left, it's because I've been with the family and, it was a terrific day, but we've been out there. Or maybe it's been, 5 to 5 or 5 back-to-back podcasts, just getting it out there and making a difference, whatever it is. But I think it sounds a little bit corny, but with wealth comes responsibility. And with that responsibility is to be productive and to make a difference.
Yes, very much so. So I think that what you were pointing to for a moment is after the liquidity event, you're almost in the small pool of people of who can you relate to, who can you talk to. And I know that in some ways you've built a community today to compare notes, almost like a peer group, which I think is great. But I could only imagine if you have shared that that was a season of your life where you made the most mistakes. But again, where are those MBA case studies? How many people say, I just sold my business and I'm, in this space right now, where are those business articles, the business magazines, the books?
Hi, Angelina, you're absolutely right. And really, if we're open about it, there for the post-exit life, which is what I call it, when you've had a successful liquidity event, there aren't the books. You don't learn it in school. No one talks about it. And a lot of the mistakes that I made, I would not have made if I was with the right people, if I was with the right peer group or the right group of advisors, which I didn't have. And that's why in the Deep Wealth Experience, as an example, the very first thing we talk about is the exit after the exit, which is what are you going to do after your liquidity event? And the participants always say, well, Jeffrey, wait a minute. What are you talking about? I haven't even had a liquidity event. Why are you even asking me that? And that's exactly why we're asking you that,
Is it
because you
so
need to
important?
know. You need
Yeah.
to know, where you are going to exit before you start. You can't just show up, I'm going to have this liquidity event and then I'll figure it out. It's too late at that point. And some people, when they do figure out what that looks like for them, there's something along the lines of, oh, you know what? I never really thought about this, but I don't think I want to have a liquidity event. I think I'm good to go for another couple decades.
Yeah. Well, I think it changes up the conversations they're going to have around purpose and meaning, because it's almost like I intuitively see like a diving board and they dive or they jump high because they're about ready to dive down. But then the moment they dive down, congratulations, you're in new waters.
You're in new waters, and look, I've been on all sides. One thing that I did deliberately that put me on all sides. I grew up initially lower middle class. In my teenage years, my father, that's when his business became more successful, and the family status changed with that. But when I started the business, Embanet, right out of school, I didn't want to work in my father's company. I didn't want to work in my uncle's company because I wanted to figure it out on my own. I was either going to hang myself by my own doing, or I was going to climb out of that pit by my own doing. And
But
so
on your terms,
but on my terms, I
entrepreneur.
and what was interesting is in the early years of Embanet, which were some of the most difficult years of my life, I was poor, living in a middle class, upper middle class, wealthy family. and just the how odd that was and how off-putting that was for me. My family and friends were taking vacation, but Jeffrey was still doing laundry at his parents' house and having dinner at the parents' house. So it was very humbling for me. So I've been on that side of the coin, and then I've
Can
been
I
on the other
just
side of the coin.
can I just interrupt for a second? That reminds
Yes,
me a little bit of one of the chapters of the Rich Dad Poor Dad series with Robert Kiyosaki, where he said
sure.
that he was living in the basement of a friend's house in order to not have a mortgage, but how humbling that was for his ego and his social image. And yet he sucked it up because he knew if he
Yeah,
could get that initial nest egg, he could start the momentum of his savings and his investments. But the
absolutely.
people around him thought he was nuts.
Absolutely. Yeah. Listen, for everyone out there, and I'm sure you've been there, or if you're just starting out, I've lost friends because, in the early days of the business, I couldn't afford employees. I was 24/7 technical support, and a little bit different back then than the way it is today. We had very basic cell phones, but if someone were to phone the office at any time, day or night, it would forward to me. So think evenings on the weekends, weekday, whenever, 2 in the morning or 9 p.m. And I'd be out with friends, and maybe we're at a movie or at a dinner, and the phone rings. I'm like, sorry guys, I need to take this, and it happens enough time. And one friend came along and said, Jeffrey, I just can't be with you anymore because I think it's rude. You're just leaving. I'm obviously not important to you, and from that perspective, perhaps that friend was right. But I had my own mission, and I knew what my priorities were, and so sacrifices were made.
Yeah, it's a tough place because you always want balance, but you can't take everyone with you on your journey, and they're not always going to make that what I call the space of the Grand Canyon to understand what it is to walk in different shoes.
Absolutely. And for me, Angelina, you it just reminded me when you use the word balance. I don't believe in balance. If you want balance, go to the movies or read a book. There they talk about balance. For me, as it plays out, I trade off the word balance for blending. It's always blending. So, as an example, particularly when my daughters were younger and on the business side, if there was a conference in maybe Orlando, which is a popular destination for conferences. Well, maybe the family would come along because the conference would end on a Friday, and then you have the weekend, and we'd go to the theme parks. And so you're blending business with the family part and back and forth, or the family knows that on certain days or certain times, or maybe it's on the weekend. Well, okay, Daddy's going to be doing some business stuff for a little bit, and then he's going to be with us. And to me, that's just blending.
Very nice. So going back to what you had shared before about those moments of being humbled or getting rejected by friends, how did you, and today, how do you still, what I call take responsibility for that internal negative self-talk that can come up with each challenge?
Absolutely, it's the self talk. And I'll just put myself out there because and I don't think I'm alone with this. I think I am my own worst critic. I am my own worst enemy because I'm hard on myself, and sometimes I don't see the forest from the trees or the trees from the forest, however that goes. And so I've been fortunate just by, and I've learned the hard way this way, but it's, there's a great saying out there, and I'm just going blank on who said it, but it wasn't me. But the quote is something like this: "You are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with." And when I looked at periods of my life where I wasn't spending the best time with people that I would say were honest, had integrity, were good people, I made some pretty bad mistakes. When I surrounded myself with people who were honest and integral and hardworking and had terrific values, they're there as a support system to protect me from me and see my blind spots and call me out on it in a supportive and loving way to not have me go down that path.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that you changed your environment so as to change your internal landscape.
Absolutely. And, for everyone out there, I've been fortunate, like I said earlier, I've been on both sides of the coin, no money, money. And, when you become successful and you walk into wealth, for starters, you're never wealthy because there's always, you are wealthy, but there's always someone who's got the bigger toy, who's got an extra zero in the bank account, who's
That's the
doing
bigger
this,
yacht.
who's a bigger yacht. If you're fortunate enough to have a plane, a bigger house, a bigger car, more cars, a bigger vacation home, you name it. There's always someone who's going to be on the monetary side wealthier and bigger than you. It's never a game that you can win. And I
Oh,
found
that's
that
honest.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I found that in those circles, because no judgment, observations in those circles, um, sometimes it's easy from the isolation to lose perspective of what's going on, and it's not a great game and not necessarily a great environment to be in. So you really have to watch who your friends are and who they aren't. The people that you think are your friends, maybe they're not, because when you walk into wealth, you become a target. You become an attraction for people. Oh, this guy's rich. Maybe there's something in it for me. And who's really showing up and what their motivation is.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing to is quality friends then.
Quality friends, true friends. It's not about the money. It's
It's
all
about
about, and it's not about where you can take
character.
them and what you can do. It's about character and
Yeah.
showing up and just being real.
Yeah. Well, that's an honest lesson. Thank you for sharing that because I think it speaks into an experience that sometimes people think the grass is greener on the other side. But congratulations, there's brand new challenges that come with that grass.
There are, and listen, let's not be, I'm not going to be so naive. Money can and does make a difference, and it does make life
It
uh,
gives you choice.
easier. It can give you choices.
Yeah.
With that, though, there's also the responsibility and the awareness that comes with that.
Yeah. So I want to bring something up that's kind of off script, and I'm not going to go down the path too much. But when I look at this Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, one of the things I do see is the entourage of 10, 20 plus people that all have their hand in Johnny Depp's pocket. So are they going to tell him the truth? Maybe, maybe not. But he's not the only person that is going to find himself surrounded by a team of people that may or may not be in integrity or may or may not have character.
Absolutely. And listen, for all you business owners out there, and particularly the successful business owners out there, I got news for you. I got another confession for you. You potentially are the emperor with no clothes. Because if we're honest about it, your employees and some of them perhaps are your friends. Well, guess what? You're the boss. You're the owner of the company. And are they really going to tell you, you really suck at this and I don't think this is right? Or are they going to tell you what you want to hear? And so, all of us, maybe not a 20-person entourage, but all of us, particularly if you're successful, everyone has a different form of an entourage. And the responsibility for us is okay, who's really showing up for me? And what does that look like? And you can do a thought experiment. You'll never know. There was a great movie that talked about this. I believe it was called The Gift, and it was the very long story but beautiful movie short is very wealthy grandfather passed away, and the whole family was fighting over the money, and he had this one grandson that maybe there's a little bit of hope that he wasn't as rotten as the family, and he put him through tests. And if he passed these tests, he would inherit not millions, but much more than that. And one of the tests was they cut the grandson off from everything. So he walked in, and his apartment couldn't go into that. It was a luxury condo. His car was taken. Everything was taken away to show him who his friends were. And lo and behold, all these so-called friends that were just these partiers living off of him all disappeared. And so the takeaway is, who in your life is there really for you that if you showed up tomorrow without the business, without the trappings of wealth, are they still going to be there because they're really a true friend, or are they off to the next sucker who's going to be giving them that lifestyle?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's also a dynamic to conversations of, I think it's phrased like not powering up conversations, but there's a power dynamic. If the other party's got more, and how much truth are you going to tell that person? How much do they want to hear, et cetera? And I'm speaking specifically within the workplace. But yeah, but it extends outside of just the workplace because people are people and humans are humans. It's not just confined to one scenario. Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, yes, people in the workplace, outside the workplace, just be careful.
Yeah. What are you more aware of today?
What I'm more aware of today, and Angelina, it's going to sound a little bit corny when I say this. It's that some of those sayings that you've heard they've been around forever, are really true. All we have is the moment. Yesterday's gone, tomorrow isn't here. Live in the moment, be in the moment, and I work I work hard. I'm saying that wrong. I remind myself. I'm mindful of that fact, and sometimes I'll be in the middle of a very ordinary moment, and I'll say this to people. I say, you know what? If I took a picture right now, right here, this ordinary moment, it's not a celebration. It's a family dinner on a Tuesday night, and I took this picture. 20 years from now, we're looking at it. 30 years from now, we're looking at it. We're going to look back 30 years from now and say, wow, look how young everyone was. Look how great we looked. Oh, some of those people aren't here anymore, or they've, passed on, or whatever it is. And we look back at that moment as, wow, those were the days. But we have that right here, right now. And to remember that. And so I'm very mindful of being in the moment. And I'm also very mindful of who do I surround myself with? And what does that look like? And am I there because I want to be there? Or am I there
Oh,
because I feel I have to be there? And, lately I've been saying more no than yes to imitations and not really asking the other side if that's okay because I want to be happy. I want to show up the best part of myself. And if I show up, it's because I choose to, not because I feel I have to.
yeah. And those are two very different, distinct energies.
Absolutely. And, I think we can all pick up on that. And I would say just closing out on this, and for some of the listeners, they may find this a little bit on the woo woo side or on the spirituality side, but for me, anyways, it really resonates. We all have an internal guidance system. Most cars today have a GPS and it tells you where to go. Well, we have that, and we've always had that as people, an internal guidance system. Some people call it a feeling, some people call it a gut instinct,
The
other people
intuitive.
call it,
Yeah, yeah.
being intuitive. Listen to that. And if you're going down a path that it just doesn't feel right, despite the peer pressure, and it takes bravery to do this, stop and go the other way. Or if you're going down a path where you could just do this all day, you feel so energized, keep on doing it.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. I think what you're pointing to is trusting yourself.
It's trusting yourself and listening to yourself. And science, interestingly, the ancients have known this, but science through the quantum field is now showing that what we call the gut, the stomach area, actually has a brain, and it's actually quicker than the brain up here, and it knows things before logically we know things. And it sounds like science fiction, but it's proven now, and there's been all kinds of peer-reviewed studies on this, and it really is there. But the takeaway, not to overcomplicate it, is listen to yourself, and if it feels right, keep on doing it. Paddle downstream, don't be paddling upstream.
Yeah, I think you're referring to going with the flow and
Go with the flow. Go with
yeah.
the flow. Have the wind behind your back.
So what steps are you taking today to develop and execute your legacy? Because you've got the baton now, you can run with it.
Well, for me, really, and this has been hard for me. It's been deep wealth, because deep wealth, we are in startup mode with
Okay.
deep wealth. It's not a company that's been around for decades, and we're really the new kid on the block with that. And it's going back to the beginning, and it's doing the heavy lifting. And it's funny with people, because people, when they learn my background, they're saying, "Hey, Jeffrey, are you for real? Come on, why aren't you on that beach having the pina colada? Why on
And the
earth
Mai
would you be
Tai.
speaking to someone like me, or the Mai Tai?
Yeah,
Why aren't you
yeah.
speaking to someone like me? You should just be out there doing that." But it's like, no, this is how I'm paying it forward. This is how I'm going to make a difference.
Yeah, I think it also brings you great fulfillment to educate.
Educate and help people. I learned for myself, my sweet spot is at the intersection of helping people with technology and education. And it seems so simple when I say it. It took me a while to figure that out. If you looked at Embanet, well, Embanet was in the education space. So we're already educating people with the universities that at the time we were working with. And it was helping the educators, helping the students, and with technology. And it all had a wonderful story and a wonderful ending that went along with that. And so that's really what makes me hum. And, here's for the listeners another tidbit that I picked up along the way. Every single person on this planet, we are all born with a superpower, but a little bit of a cruel trick is played on us. We don't get an instruction manual and we don't know what that superpower is. And so our mission is twofold. Number one, we've got to find out what that superpower is. There's only one of us. Let's stop imitating other people. Let's just be us.
Oh,
And
yeah.
when you find out what your superpower is now your responsibility to take that to the world and share it with the world.
That's deep.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah,
deep,
there's no
but
self-minimizing there.
no self-minimizing there. But my challenge for anyone out there, pick your favorite success story, your favorite legacy story in terms of a person, and do a deep dive on that person. And dollars to donuts, you're coming back and saying, okay, this person, maybe they weren't so successful, but once, for most of their life, but once they found their superpower, they never looked back. Or this person was very successful from a young age because this person found out the superpower at the young age, ran with that, and made all the difference. So it's there for everyone. And the best part of all, it's free. It's built within us. And we're the only ones that can really access it.
Yeah. They have to do some deep inner work and maybe not follow the crowd.
Exactly. Easier
Yeah.
said than done.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of backbone. Sometimes I find that one of the reasons that people stop regarding executing on their legacy is what if they don't get the approval of other people?
Yeah, approval is a big deal, and again, that's why it's going back to who are the five people that you spend the most amount of time with, because if they're true friends and they really support you, they really love you, they accept you for who you are with all your blunders, with all your successes. You could walk home and sign a $1 billion deal, but you're still a regular person. Oh yeah, that's Angelina. That's great. You got the $1 billion deal. So what's for dinner tonight? What's going on?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think you're pointing to that individual is still human. They still want to connect with other
Yes,
humans and not just live in a bubble of isolation.
exactly.
Yeah. When you are in integrity, what is the best of Jeffrey that can come forward?
When it's a great question, and integrity, uh, me being integral and the people around me being integral is something as of late that's been of a lot of focus for me. And I think for myself anyways, uh, being our true selves is not so easy today, because we are judged, for better or for worse, even by family and loved ones. We're judged. And for me, the softer side of me, I can be a people pleaser, and despite myself at times, I will want to please people just because that's just my makeup of who I am. And so it's a fine balance of not being a jerk and forget everyone else. I'm just gonna do this because it feels right for me, and I don't really care that it's making them uncomfortable. To putting myself aside, which is not being integral, and doing it because it makes them happier. That's what they want. And so it's that fine balance of respecting myself, respecting my space, and having other people respect that space. And here's a question for everyone that's listening in, particularly in the workplace. If you're running your own business, as an example, or if you're a leader, a team lead, supervisor, manager, whatever the case would be, you are very good at directing people, hey, do this, do that. I bet, though, you're probably not that great when someone comes to you and you're super busy. You're going crazy trying to hit this deadline, and a coworker comes up to you, hey, Angelina, do you have a minute? I want to talk to you about something. And it's something so unimportant, but you break your back trying to help, or you're so busy and they're saying,
Oh,
hey
yeah.
Angelina, can you just help me? I'm really busy with this. Maybe you can pitch in and help. And the words just come out of your mouth. You don't even think about it. Oh, of course I will. And you're just thinking to yourself, oh, why did I just say that? And so being integral is protecting yourself and being in a polite and respectful way. Angelina, hey, I would love to help you. If I do that, though, I can't finish these other projects. Which of these other projects would you like me to stop doing so I can help you with that? Or, hey, Angelina, I hear you. I'm just in the middle of something right now. Is it urgent, or we have a one-on-one meeting coming up tomorrow? Can it wait till that meeting? And we don't do that enough for ourselves, but we do that in other ways, but not for ourselves, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And I think what you're pointing to is honoring our own legacies without the compromise, without the apology, without the distractions, because whether we realize it or not, we set an example as role models.
Absolutely. And, Angelina, I think on that point for integrity, it's when you can do the right thing when it's the hardest thing to do. And, for myself, I haven't been that successful all of the time in that area. And doing what's easy usually isn't what's right. But being integral is always doing what's right, despite what's going on. And no matter how hard it is to say, I'm so sorry, I really can't help you on that. I can't do that. Or I'm going to have to take a pass. Or no, I'm not the person to be asking for that. Maybe speak to so and so.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing to is the complex stuff.
Oh, is it ever not?
I think people sometimes want it to be, like left, right, on, off, yes, no, compared to the shades of gray in between of I'd love to help you, but right now I'm honoring my legacy.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
so when you say something like that, it's eloquent, it's respectful, and oftentimes there is white, it is shades of gray that goes on in between. I think they made a great book or movie along the same lines with that title, but we're not going to go there on,
yeah,
on
different
that.
subject.
But it's being integral in that regard. It's still being respectful with people. Is doing the right thing, but being yourself, being respectful. And you know what? It's okay. This is going back to the emperor with no clothes. You don't want to be the emperor with no clothes, and it's okay for people to respect you, but not necessarily like you all the time because
That's
you're doing
also
the
a
right
tough
thing.
one. Yeah, because it's fun to be liked.
Listen, it's fun to be liked. We get that adrenaline hit,
That
and
dopamine.
it's that whole dopamine thing going, and we,
Yeah,
we like we seek that approval, and I think that's just wired in our DNA. Back in the day when survival meant fitting into the community, you couldn't be the outsider. So I think we're
can
wired
be
that way.
excommunicated from the
You
community.
could you cannot be excommunicated, otherwise that'd be the end of you and your gene line, and that would be it.
Yeah,
But standing up and being integral and being yourself, and that's where clarity needs to come into play. Okay, who am I and what do I stand for, and what would that really mean for me? And sometimes in a conversation, so I've got another confession for you, Angelina. Are you ready for this? Two things, two confessions. Wow, a two for one deal here. For starters, I'm a business extrovert. I love getting up on stage and presenting and talking and doing things like this. But
you
I'm the biggest introvert at home and just in my personal life. That's confession one. But please go ahead.
I just was going to share, you mentioned a story about Geico, but your variation of it was 10 minutes or less. Let me pitch my story. If you don't like it, I'll leave.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You're putting yourself out there. Particularly back in the early days, when I was getting Embanet up and running. And getting the decision makers on the phone who are busy. But yeah, that was my. I say, yeah, you got this. Even the pizza, you have the 30-minute or free guarantee. I'm gonna one up that. If you don't like it, not even in 10 minutes, you don't like the first 5 minutes of what I've got to say, I'm gonna hang up. You won't even have to do it. I'll do it for you if it's not going well. And I think people like that vulnerability. When you're just open and honest, and you have a little bit of fun, and you can. Just play with yourself a little bit at your own expense for other people, but in a respectful way.
Yeah, yeah. Good for you. I think it's important to be able to laugh at ourselves, especially during the growing pains, because I think at that time you were new to sales and or somewhat new, and you were just honing your craft. And we talked about being refined in the fire, and very few want to volunteer unless they truly are passionate about what it is that they're up to in life.
Absolutely. And, offline, Angelina, you and I were talking about multi-level marketing or network sales, whatever you like to call it. And that's really where I cut my teeth. I was 16 years old. And I knew from a young age, I always wanted to be a business owner, entrepreneur. And my father introduced me to someone who was selling water purifiers. And so I started selling water purifiers, but I was terrible. And I remember early on, I was doing a presentation at a neighbor's house. And I was nervous, and not like today, but back then when I was presenting, and I was just sweating buckets, and and so the neighbor's child was there, and he looked at the father, and he said, "Daddy, why is there water coming down from Jeffrey's forehead?" And it was, but you learn from that, and really that network marketing gave me the foundation of, okay, how do you interact with people? How do you tell stories? How do you identify? No one cares about you if we're honest about it. They're only thinking about themselves. How do you tune into what I call the world's favorite radio station, WII.FM, the What's in It for Me radio station?
Yeah. Well, I think what you're pointing to is, as the sweat's pouring down, it's that willingness to look bad for a season so that you can grow to get to where you need to be. Because without those growing pains, I don't know if you would have had the skill set to have sold Embanet, even if you had waited 2 years and the whole scenario behind it. But I'm pointing to the fact that it was like you were willing to go through the gauntlet, knowing that it could make you better, more mature,
Absolutely.
more evolved, more
Absolutely.
transformed. But most people say, they don't say bring it on.
Absolutely. And, Angelina, and for listeners, Angelina, really, you touched on something that we don't hear enough. And, people ask me with Embanet, Jeffrey, you're this cockroach startup. I read your article about cockroach startups and you talk all about that. But I got to ask you something, Jeffrey. You really, the bootstrapping, you grew a little bit slower and eventually you got it, but it took a while. How much better would you have been? How much bigger would you have been if you would have gotten outside capital? And it's a quick answer. And the answer would have been Embanet would have failed. Embanet would not have gotten to where it eventually got to with a 9-figure liquidity event that we had, because with the lack of resources, the only other thing left is another R word. It's not resources, but it's resilience. And
Mm.
resilience trumps resources. So because we didn't have the money, because we were bootstrapping it, we were forced to do things that no one else would otherwise do in the industry, but it worked. And that's why we were more productive, we were more successful, we beat the competition. And, for every dollar of revenue that Embanet earned, we kept 53 cents or 53%, not gross profit, but net profit, because of the resilience, because we didn't have, so we had to compensate for that.
Yeah. So before I ask you about what's the best way for viewers and listeners to reach out, how do you celebrate wins? And I think that this is important, because I think in the culture today, I think it's important to celebrate. We got plenty of fear out there in the media. We got plenty of negativity and just, other, like no good stuff. So let's talk about celebrating for a moment, because I think that there's something to be said about, you do a good job, you master those skills, you make that milestone, and now there's a moment to celebrate.
Absolutely, and I think the retailers have taken celebrations to a whole different level that I don't think it was ever intended to. That's my bias, of course. And so for me, celebration isn't material. And again, I've been there. Remember, I've been on both sides of the coin, and I've been in a situation where I was able to buy all the toys, and I have to tell you, the exhilaration of buying the toys was terrific. It lasted maybe that night, maybe the next day, perhaps the next day after that, but then it was gone and you're all back again. Oh, I'm kind of bored with that. Let's move on to the next thing. So for me, celebration, it's meaningful. Who am I gonna celebrate this with? It can just be a little toast at a dinner, or it could be just with some friends, or it could be a high five. Why not write yourself a note of thanks? Or if you're celebrating someone else's win, why don't you call them out in a positive way? Send a company-wide email, do a good old-fashioned handwritten note and send it to them, or some kind of, hey, find out what their currency is. Angelina, oh, your currency isn't money. Okay, your currency is, I'm just making this up, your currency is time. Hey, take a day off. You've earned it. On the house, go enjoy. So for me, it's really something that's going to be meaningful. And I think the challenge with most business owners and entrepreneurs, we're type A personalities. We get to the top of one mountain, and it's really the bottom of the next mountain, and we don't
Yeah.
celebrate. And I've been guilty of that as much as anyone else.
Yeah. And chasing the next thing and the next
And
thing.
chasing the next thing, yeah.
What's the best way for the listeners and viewers to find out more about you, what you're up to today with your latest startup?
Absolutely. Well, for starters, I'll give you my email address. How's that for a change? And if you have any questions, just reach out. It's Jeffrey, Jeffrey, at deepwealth, DEEPWEALTH.com. So Jeffrey at deepwealth.com. Or come to the deepwealth.com website and you'll see what we're all about, or listen to our podcast, the Deep Wealth Sell My Business podcast. It's all there. You'll find me on social media as well, but deepwealth.com or Jeffrey at deepwealth.com is the best way to reach me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining today as a guest on this podcast. And thank you for speaking into legacy regarding the space that you're living in, because I think other people are curious, both whether they're in the same space or maybe they're wondering from the outside looking in. And I just wanted to acknowledge something you also said about how legacies can be like red wine. And growing up, you didn't have red wine. So I think it's important that you are designing it today because you have daughters that are looking on and they're looking on into your example, and you're just self-aware and you're conscious of what it is you are developing, and just very in tune to the present moment. So thank you for speaking into all those different elements.
Well, thank you, Angelina. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor to be here with you today. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, very nice. And I might just read out the closing paragraph if that's kosher.
Let's do it.
Okay, all right. So in closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder to Legacy Planning, a boutique coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help anyone define, develop, and execute their legacy, and scour the landscape for anyone that can be great resources to every aspect of your legacy. For many viewers, there can never be enough education and preparation for what I call the moot around your castle, or the preparation of your legacy. So whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content of this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. Thank you so much for joining us today. And remember to like, subscribe, and if you're on Apple Podcasts, to rate and review. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jeffrey, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much. Take care.